All right, looks like the recording has started, so let's get this show on the road. Hi everyone, welcome to our public notification rule overview webinar. This training has been put together and targets EPA and our state regulator partners. Depending on where you're from, good morning or good afternoon. I'm looking through the registration information. We had people coming from all over the US, so I appreciate everyone joining us today and your interest in the public notification rule. Today I'm going to be joined by my colleagues Sunny and Ken Harmon, who is going to talk about their enforcement targeting tool in OECA and some updates related to public notification. First, I want to start out with a disclaimer. I'll give you a few minutes to read that. In essence, it notes that this presentation, even though we, EPA, have done our best in terms of reviewing it and trying to make sure that it is accurate and fits with the rules, if there is something that it conflicts with the rule language, the rule language is binding. So keep that in mind. Also want to note that if I refer to primacy agency or state, they essentially mean the same thing for the purposes of this webinar. And also want to note that even though the lead and copper rule has recently made some updates to the public notification, we have a lot to go over today, and we're not going to touch on the lead and copper rule issues specifically. And again, keep putting those questions and issues in the chat. We'll be happy to address those. In the chat message box, I've also included handouts for this webinar. I sent them in an email, although I know we had some late registrations, so if you need a copy of those, you can find them in the chat box. Before we get started with our rule webinar, we want to know how many people are viewing this webinar with you. If there's 5 or more, please include that in the chat. This information is helpful to understand how many people we're reaching. And I think Alyssa is going to put a link to respond in the chat. Perfect. You can also, there's a link Alyssa put in the chat if you want to reply directly to that form. See a lot of people viewing by themselves, which is great. We are in a pandemic, so that's understandable. How do I turn off these notifications, Colin? You can mute the chat in your Teams. All right, we're going to keep going. Go ahead and keep responding. Again, Alyssa has included a link to a form that you can use instead of using the chat. So the overview for today's webinar, we're going to talk about the general public notification rule requirements. We're also going to go over the public notification rule tiering, the contents and the required elements. There are specific PN requirements for variances and exemptions, either if the system is using a variance or exemption or if they have violated the conditions of it. There's multilingual requirements we'll go over, some special notices, formatting, record keeping, reporting requirements. There's an example public notification included at the end of your handouts, and we'll talk about the violations enforcement. We'll have Ken talk about his ETT tool, and if there's time, we'll do a rule quiz, a PN rule quiz, and we'll do Q&A at the very end. Some reminders, there's some handouts, and the links are in your the PDF copy of the presentation that we sent out today for more information. We also included a list of acronyms that are used in this presentation. I'm not going to go over all of the acronyms in this list. You can reference them in your handouts. Another page of acronyms. And let's start off with the oops, we lost the presentation. The overview of the rule. The public notification rule in the Safe Drinking Water Act Looks like some people are having some audio issues. There's a phone number you can use to call in. Let's see.
Sarah, you sound good to me.
Okay.
This is Alyssa. So
Thanks,
I will
Alyssa.
follow up with these folks with audio issues.
Okay, great. So with the overview of the rule, the Safe Drinking Water Act includes a requirement for public notification to consumers, which was added from the 1996 amendments. And the belief from President Clinton was that Americans have the right to know what's in their drinking water and where it comes from before they turn on their tap. Americans have a right to trust that every precaution is being taken to protect their families from dangerous and sometimes even deadly contaminants, and that they have the right to know that government is doing everything they can to keep their water safe. And the public notification rule is important for implementation purposes for EPA and states because the consumers rely on our information and getting those notices to make those informed health decisions. Having some technical difficulties. All right, we're just gonna skip forward. All right, looks like Sunny is back. Okay, perfect. Bear with us, folks. All right, looks like we're back in business. All right, so the overview of the public notification rule. The rule has information on who must give the notice, what types of notice are required given the situation, who must be notified. It's broken down into 3 tiers. And based on there's some content requirements and delivery requirements based on the tiering. There's also some exceptions for special notices. The PN rule has 10 content elements, although we'll talk about some exemptions with some of the special notices that we have. For variants and exemptions, there are requirements for systems that are operating under a variants and exemptions or that have violated their conditions. And there's a multilingual requirement for systems that serve a large population of non-English speaking consumers. As I referred to earlier, the special notices are in certain circumstances, such as if a system is monitoring under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, if there's an exceedance of the fluoride secondary maximum contaminant level, in cases when the non-community water system exceeds the nitrate MCL of 10 milligrams per liter, and I'll get into more detail on that, and failure to monitor cryptosporidium for any 3 months, and failure to determine bin classification or mean crypto level. We're going to talk about record keeping and reporting requirements. The system has requirements to submit information to the primacy agency and keep files on site. States have requirements to report to CIDWIS Fed and maintain files as well. And there are also some special primacy requirements we'll touch on. So in this webinar, I'm excited about this. There is this special symbol with you can see it with it looks like a remix or a crisscross arrow. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to highlight specific areas of state flexibility or primacy agency flexibility in the public notification rule. And here are some examples in which the primacy agency can elevate the public notice to higher tiers. They can require public notice for situations that are already listed specifically in the public notice rule. They can set certain requirements in a tier 1 situation or extend the deadline for a tier 2 notification, and they can allow alternate delivery methods for the PN notices. And they can also, in certain circumstances, allow limited distribution if a limited portion of the distribution system is affected. And so keep an eye out for these little flexibility symbols. Benny, I hear some. Oh, there we go. Let's talk about, oh, yep, I'm going to turn it over to Sunny, and she's going to go over the general PN rule requirements.
Sunny, it looks like you're muted. If you could please unmute yourself.
Now, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we will be talking about who must give notice and to whom that notice should be given. It is important to mention that all public water systems must give notice to I'm sorry for that. All the public water system must give notice on every time that there is a national primary drinking water violation or situation of concerns. It is important that the owners or operators of the system provide notice also to consecutive systems owners or operators, but it is not a responsibility to provide notification to the person it serves. It is the consecutive system responsibility to do that. In the case that the primacy agency provide notification on behalf of the system, it is important that they meet all the requirements the public water system will otherwise need to meet, and to remind ourselves that the public water system remains responsible for ensuring the public notification requirements are met. Who must be notified? All of the public water system must provide notice to all the persons served, not just the bill customers. Notify consecutive systems. A wholesale system not required to notify the person served by consecutive systems. Provide notification to new billing units, specifically for the community water system, and the non-community water system should continuously post in conspicuous locations for new customers. It is also important that the public water system send a copy of the public notification with the certification of compliance to the primacy agency within 10 days of issuing a notice. If the primacy agency allows the public water system, they can limit the distribution of the public notification to only persons served by portion of the public water system out of compliance. The primacy agency may allow limited distribution only if the violation is in portion of distribution system that is either physically or hydraulically isolated from other parts of the distribution system. It is important that permission be granted in writing. And now Sarah will continue discussing the public notification rule tiers.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Let's talk about the PN rule tiers. In the public notification rule, the public notices are divided into 3 tiers based on the significance and severity of the event, and the delivery timing is based on the risk to human health. So the tier 1 is the acute situations with serious potential to cause adverse impacts on human health. The notice should go out within 24 hours. For tier 2 notices, those are potential to have adverse health impacts, and those must go out within 30 days or as soon as possible, although there's some flexibility we'll talk about later. And tier 3, those are situations that are not already in tier 1 and tier 2. Those go out within 12 months and could be included in an annual report or CCR. More specifically, Tier 1, again, I mentioned the acute violations that have to go out pretty quickly. Examples include an E. coli maximum contaminant level violation under the revised total coliform rule, or if there's a violation of the MCL for nitrate, nitrite, or total nitrate, nitrite. In some cases, the non-community water systems can exceed the nitrate MCL if allowed under certain circumstances by the primacy agency, and that's in 141.11 under our chemical contaminant rules. Another violation for Tier 1 is the MRDL of chlorine dioxide, the maximum residual disinfection level for chlorine dioxide. More examples, and here's some flexibility with the state, a violation of the turbidity MCL if it's required by the primacy agency, an exceedance of the maximum allowable turbidity level, a treatment technique violation if required by the primacy agency. Other situations may be occurrence of a waterborne disease, a fecal indicator in the source water under the groundwater rule, and other violations or situations as determined by the primacy agency. As far as timings goes, the notice should go out within 24 hours. The system also has to contact the primacy agency to determine if there are additional requirements that need to be met, and this includes the repeat notices, timing, form, matter, and frequency that those need to go out, or the duration that the notices must be posted. For delivery method, the system must use at minimum broadcast media, posting in conspicuous locations, hand delivery, or another method as determined by the primacy agency. And remember, keep in mind that these notices are high concern for health risks. In short situations, we want to broadcast these messages far and wide on short notices. Some systems may have social media. That could be a good supplemental delivery method if they want to put that on there. In DC, they have, I can sign up for alerts to get additional notifications on the drinking water. For example, if people work in DC and live in another area, they can sign up to get notices. Other systems may have other ways to send their notices. That might be a good supplemental delivery method. Moving on to Tier 2, these are other violations and situations that have potential to have serious but not immediate adverse effects. And these usually include the maximum contaminant level, maximum residual disinfectant level, and treatment technique violations where Tier 1 isn't already required. There may be monitoring requirements that primacy agencies may require a Tier 2, or the rule may require a Tier 2 notice. If the system fails to comply with conditions of a variance or exemptions, that's a Tier 2. And failure to take corrective action or failure to maintain at least a 4-log treatment of viruses before or after the first customer. So in some cases, as I mentioned in the Tier 1, with the flexibility for the primacy agency, there are some situations where the system has to consult with the primacy agency to determine if they need to do the Tier 1 or do the Tier 2 notices. Treatment techniques resulting from a single exceedance of turbidity limits under the surface water treatment rule. Treatment technique violations resulting from single exceedances of the turbidity limits under the interim enhanced surface water treatment rule, or the turbidity MCL violations determined by an average of turbidity measurements over 2 consecutive days. Timing for Tier 2 is delivery is 30 days or as soon as practical. The primacy agency may allow additional time for the initial notice up to 3 months. However, it must be granted in writing, and it's not appropriate to grant those extensions for an unresolved violation or across the board for Tier 2. The systems must repeat these notices, these Tier 2 notices, every 3 months as long as the violation or situation persists. However, the primacy agency could determine a different frequency in writing. And if posted, the notice must stay up for at least 7 days, even if the violation or situation has been resolved. For delivery methods, community water systems must use mail or otherwise direct delivery, and another method, the non-community water systems must post, mail, or direct deliver their notices, and another method reasonably calculated to reach the person served. These number 2 methods are examples could include posting it in a newspaper, a newsletter, email, posting multiple copies in central locations such as the mail, the post office, posting it in public places or on the internet. And notice the flexibility icon above. The states and privacy agencies could allow another method in writing. Last but not least, Tier 3 violations are for violations in situations not requiring Tier 1 or Tier 2. These are typically our monitoring violations or testing violations, except when a Tier 1 or Tier 2 is required. And in the revised total coliform rule, there are reporting requirements that also require a Tier 3 notice. So other situations that are included in the Tier 3 notices are the availability of unregulated contaminant monitoring results for those systems that are monitoring under UCMR. If a system is operating under a variance or exemption, they need to send out a Tier 3 notice. And if there's an exceedance of the secondary maximum contaminant level for fluoride, which is 2 milligrams per liter, that's a Tier 3 notice as well. Timing for delivery for Tier 3 notices are no later than 1 year. And then if it's a situation that continues to persist, they need to repeat that annually. And if it's posted, it must stay there for a minimum of 7 days, even if the violation or situation is resolved. For delivery methods, community water systems must mail or use another direct delivery requirement. Non-community water systems can post, mail, or direct delivery similar to the Tier 2, and both types of systems must use another method to reach other persons served by the systems that may not get direct deliveries, such as bills. And those examples of other methods could include newspapers, newsletters, emails, posting in central locations. And in the case for Tier 3, they can include it in an annual report. For community water systems, they have their consumer confidence reports, or CCRs. The non-community water systems could send out their own annual report with all the notices. For community water systems that want to use their CCR to deliver their Tier 3 notices, they still must meet the timing and content requirements for Tier 3, and that's no later than 12 months after learning of the violation. And in 2013, EPA developed a memo to interpret the term direct delivery to include electronic delivery options. And so systems that are delivering their CCRs using the approved electronic methods that we've described in the memo or that their state has described, they can also provide those PNs in their CCRs. Now, as I've mentioned in some of the slides, that the notification timeline starts when the system learns or becomes aware of the violation. And so let's talk about some examples of what that means. In the case of an MCL violation, it could be when the system receives the lab results, or for the chemical contaminants that have the running annual average, it could be after the system determines their compliance. After a monitoring violation, going back to the chemical contaminants, if they're required to sample during a quarter and the quarter has passed and they still haven't collected that sample, that's when they need to do the PN. And for reporting violation, if the system misses the deadline to report to the primacy agency, that's a reporting violation. Systems are also required to notify new billing units or new customers. The community water systems must send a copy of the most recent PN to the billing units, or of ongoing violations or situations requiring PN, or if there's an existence, or if they're operating under a variance or exemptions. And non-community water systems must continuously post PN for situations that are ongoing, or if there's a variance or exemption, as long as that exists. And here's some examples of conspicuous locations, community boards on a campground or near a faucet or pump. Let's talk about more flexibilities for the primacy agencies. They can require PN for situations that are not already listed in our PN rule. In the back, there's an Appendix A that lists by CFR section what situations or violations need a public notice and what tiering it falls into. However, the primacy agency could also elevate that tier. If there's a situation, maybe the MCL the system violates an MCL, but the level of contaminant is extremely high and the state is worried about it, they could elevate it from a tier 2 to a tier 1, for example, or if there are other situations that they feel they want to elevate to a higher PN level. They have that flexibility in the PN rule. As I mentioned, the states can allow alternate delivery methods in writing, or if the state chooses to adopt their own regulations that allow for methods of delivery we haven't described in our rule, that's an option for them as well. And the state can, or primacy agency can give notice on behalf of the water system. However, all the requirements for PN still have to be met in terms of content and delivery. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Sunny to talk about the PN content and elements.
Sunny, it looks like you're muted again. We're still not hearing you. Yep, we're not hearing your audio. In the meantime, we are getting some good questions, so I do recommend that folks, as their questions come up, please go ahead and send those in the chat, and we'll just wait for Sunny to come back on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. So now it is time to talk a little bit about what is required to include in the public notification. There are 10 elements that should be included in every public notification, and I will first mention them and then we'll describe and talk a little bit more in details on each one of those elements. The first one is that it's a description of the violation or the situation, then when the violation or the situation occurs, potential adverse health effects, population at risk, including subpopulations that may be particularly vulnerable if exposed, whether alternate water supplies should be used, actions consumers should take, corrective actions being taken, when the system will resolve the problem, the name, number, and address for additional information if needed, and the standard distribution language encouraging notice recipients to distribute notice to order. In details, the first element, that is a description of violation or situation, should include the contaminant of concerns, the levels at which contaminants are detected, areas of distribution system affected if it is applicable. The second element is to include in that public notification when the violation or the situation occurs, For example, the date sample above maximum contaminant level was taken, or the date when a scheduled sample was missed. The third element is the standard health effects language or language for monitoring or testing violations. For example, standard health effects language for arsenics include some people who drink water containing arsenic in excess to the maximum contaminant level over many years could experience skin damage or problems with their circulatory system and may have an increased risk of getting cancer. In the case of monitoring violation, the required language is we are required to monitor your drinking water for specific contaminants on a regular basis. Results of regular monitoring are an indicator of whether or not your drinking water meets health standards. During the specific compliance period, we did not monitor or test or did not conduct at all monitoring or testing for the contaminants and therefore cannot be sure of the quality of your drinking water during that time. The fourth element is to include the population that is at risk. For example, infants below the age of 6 months may drink water containing nitrates in excess of the maximum contaminant level, and they could become seriously ill if it is untreated and may die. Another element that should be included is whether alternate water supplies should be used, for example, bottled water. The public notification may also include actions consumers should take. For example, boiled water nappies should include a specific instruction. We should specify between do not use or do not drink. And it is important also to include when to seek medical attention. Please remember that all the elements must be addressed in the public notification, even if there is no action that should be taken. For example, if an issue has already been resolved, the public water system still have to include the element 6 and should note that no action is required. Element number 7 requests to include what is being done to correct the violation or the situation. For example, if a system that took a negative coliform bacteria samples may include they are now flushing pipes in the distribution system as a precaution. Element 8 requires that the system include in that notification when they are expecting to return to compliance. Because a system may say that the situation is resolved after running the added precautions, or they can include a prediction of when the system will return into compliance. The 9th element requires the public water system to include the name, number, and business address for additional information. And element 10 requires a specific standard language to encourage distribution of notice, as we mentioned in a previous slide. Health effects language for maximum contaminant level or for maximum residual disinfectant levels or treatment techniques violations and violations of and assumptions should be included. There is a standard language to encourage the distribution of the public notification, and also a standard language when monitoring and testing procedures violations occur. Now we will take a break of 5 minutes, and we will appreciate if you can raise your hand after you return so we can be sure that all of you are back. Thank you. Can you hear me better now? I want to try the volume.
Yes, Eddie, you're a bit stronger now, so I would just recommend trying to project a bit more, but this sounds good.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, I will wait for your cue to start.
I think you can go ahead whenever you're ready, Sunny. Thanks.
Thank you. Now we will be talking about public notification for the specific situation where there are variants and exemptions. When a public notification tier 3 is required for variants and exceptions, the public water system operating under that variants and or exceptions must notify consumers within 1 year of obtaining variance or exception and a repeat notice annually for as long as the variance or exception exists. It is important to mention that in addition to the 10 elements that all public notification must include, there are other elements that must be included. All the tier 3 public notifications for systems that are under variance or exceptions have to include an explanation of the reasons for variance or exceptions, the date on which the variance or exemption was issued, a status on steps being taken to comply with the terms and schedules of the variance or exemption, and a notice of any opportunity for public input in review of variance or exceptions. A Tier 2 public notification is required if the system violated the conditions for the variance or exceptions, and they should notify the consumers within 30 days. As we mentioned, it is important to include the 10 required content elements for all the public notifications and applicable mandatory health effects language. Now Sarah will continue discussing the multilingual requirements for public notifications.
Thank you, Sunny. I'm going to try and request control again. All right, here we go. Multilingual requirements. Systems are required to provide, in certain circumstances, or if they serve a population with a significant proportion of non-English speaking customers, they need to provide information in the translated languages saying that this information is important, and provide a phone number or address where people can contact the system to get a translated copy of the notice. And if there's in situations where the privacy agency may not have provided guidance, the systems should still provide that same information if there's a significant proportion of non-English speaking customers. Usually we give a ballpark estimate of maybe 10 to 15% non-English speaking population, but again, it's up to the privacy agency, and systems may know their communities better than certainly we at headquarters do. So let's talk about those special notices under the public notification rule. So for systems, the community water systems and non-transient, non-community water systems, they may be required to monitor under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, in which case they need to notify their customers that the data is available and provide a contact information to get that information. For community water systems, the information is also included in their CCRs. And for the Tier 3 notices, for the UCMR results, the 10 content elements are not required. For systems that exceed the secondary maximum contaminant level of fluoride, which is over 2 milligrams per liter, but doesn't exceed the maximum contaminant level of 4 milligrams per liter, the systems need to provide a Tier 3 notice within 12 months of learning of that exceedance, and this applies to the community water systems. And primacy agencies could require a sooner notice than 12 months or repeat more frequently, and it follows the same Tier 3 delivery and content requirements. It has additional mandatory language. As I previously alluded to, for non-community water systems, there may be certain circumstances where the primacy agency allows them to exceed the 10 milligram per liter nitrate MCL, in which case they must provide notice to the people they serve, including continuous posting with a Tier 1 notice style of PN. So in cases where the system has repeated failure to conduct monitoring of the source water for cryptosporidium, the system must provide notice that the monitoring has not been completed as specified no later than 30 days after the system has failed to collect any 3 months of monitoring, and that's a Tier 2, as well as failure to determine bid classification or mean cryptosporidium level, and this the system must provide notice of that determination, that the determination has not been made or as required no later than 30 days after they failed to do so. And the notices must be repeated as specified. Notice is not required if the public water system is complying with a state-approved, primacy agency-approved schedule to address the violation, and that's only applicable to the failure to determine bin classification. And there's additional mandatory language for those notices as well, including what the system is doing to correct the violation and when it expects to resolve the situation. So another special notice, although this is not specifically in the public notice rule, but worth mentioning, under the groundwater rule, a significant deficiency that is not corrected after a specified amount of time must give notice of the nature of the significant deficiency, the date it was identified by the primacy agency, and the primacy approved plan and schedule for correction. Now for delivery, the community water systems can include this in their CCRs, their consumer confidence reports, and the non-community water systems will deliver that as the primacy agency directs them, and it must be repeated annually. And another note, the multilingual requirements also apply for these special notices. Let's talk about record keeping, reporting, and formatting requirements under the public notice rule. So the formatting requirements include displaying in a conspicuous way, no overly technical language or very small print, not formatted in a way that defeats the purpose of the public notice, and no language that nullifies the purpose of the notice. For the system's record-keeping requirements and reporting, they must send a confirmation to the primacy agency within 10 days after completing their delivery of their PNs, as well as the certification, and they must keep the notices on file for at least 3 years after they issue them. The primacy agency requirements, the primacy agencies need to report to CIDWS Fed within 40 days after the quarter in which the violation occurred, and they must also keep a copy of the notices on file for 3 years. Let's talk about PN rule violations. So in the rule requirements, we talked about the requirements of the form, manner, and frequency of delivery that the system needs to provide the primacy agency with a copy of the notice, and they must certify that all the requirements are met. And when those requirements aren't met, it's a PN violation. And how are they identified? Typically, states may track this using the certification. However, states may have other ways of tracking the violations and the PNs that are associated with it. If a primacy agency doesn't receive a copy of the PN, either the initial or the repeat, or it's received late, it's a violation. And if the primacy agency reviews the PN and decides that the delivery content and form wasn't adequate, or the distribution timing wasn't adequate, it's also a violation under the PN rule. reporting and follow-up. So as I mentioned, the states need to, and privacy agencies need to report to CIDWS Fed, and that includes if there was a violation, either initial, repeat, and the certification violations, the date of the PN violation, if the PN violation is, or the PN was required for a national primary drinking water rule violation, there's a link to those violations in CIDWS Fed, when the system returned to compliance, and if there was a enforcement action brought on with the system. And for a system to return to compliance, they need to provide the notice. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ken, who is going to talk about some updates in his neck of the woods for his enforcement tracking tool. Ken?
Hi. And I'm driving for this. Just want to make sure if I need to be sharing my screen, so I will do that.
Why don't you, oops, you want to go? Okay, sure.
Okay, well, whichever you'd prefer.
Nope, you got it.
Okay, so let me bring this over here where I can see it. And I've already gone further than I meant to go. Okay, so you just heard Sarah talk about the privacy agency's requirements to report into CIDWS and what sort of factors you need to report and when. And that's where my office and Sarah's office got brought together by the Office of the Inspector General back in 2019 because the Inspector General did an investigation where they looked at the information regarding public notice violations that are in CIDWS and found that the data quality was not very good. There were a lot of instances where data that should have been reported was not captured in CIDWS Fed, and there were instances where updates to data had not been input to CIDWS Fed. So overall, the Office of the Inspector General determined that the public could not get a very good sense of what the quality of their drinking water may be by looking at the public notice violations data that they could get from EPA's public databases. So among the and here is the Inspector General's report. So among the recommendations that the Inspector General had for the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water and my office, the Office of Enforcement and Compliance Assurance, I'm in the Office of Compliance part, was to implement a strategy and internal controls to make sure that we had gotten the data in better shape prior to the uploading and migration of that data into the new modernized CIDWS Fed. And most of you are probably well aware that CIDWS modernization is not coming overnight. So yes, we are working on making sure that the data will be in better quality when that migration occurs, but we also realize that another public-facing database was potentially causing confusion. And that is because my office's enforcement targeting tool, or ETT, assigns point values to every violation that remains uncorrected and has not been addressed by a formal enforcement action, and that certain older public notice violations were generating disproportionately high levels of scores, which could inflate a public water system's ETT score, which could make it look as if there were serious violations at that at that public water system, when what was producing those scores were older PN violations more than 5 years old, which presented very little, if any, current risk to public health. And these so-called legacy violations were hanging around in our ETT scoring system for longer than 5 years, longer than the underlying violation that triggered the requirement to provide public notification, and longer than those triggering violations produced ETT scores, because when a violation has a compliance period end date, it stops being considered for ETT scoring after 5 years. Those of you who have been working in this area for a long time, probably that a public notification violation has no compliance period end date. It's what's known as an open-ended violation. So that meant that those violations remained in our database and continued to generate violation scores for a long time, meaning they never went away. So when we were looking at ways in which we could make our ETT scores and the public facing data resulting or that presenting what violations we or what systems we thought were serious violators, we realized that we could make a change to the ETT scoring system so that the ETT scores produced by legacy PN violations did not skew the results and did not make it look as if a system with old PN violations was a more serious violator than a system that had more current violations. So on December 18th, 2021, there was a joint memorandum that of course, it has to explain things in more detail, but the bottom line is that we changed the ETT scoring system so that PN violations also sunset from the ETT. So they do not have a compliance period end date, but they do have a compliance period begin date. So they will sunset 5 years after their compliance period begin date, which will largely reflect the period during which, or at which, the triggering violation also sunset from the ETT if it had not yet been reported, corrected, or returned to compliance. So the question that probably some of you have is then, okay, so what happened? We were able to get this change in place in time for the January 2021 ETT quarterly update. So we were able to run the numbers to see which systems that would have been priority systems, and I realize there's a typo right there, priority systems under the old method, and how many would be priority systems under the new method. And of course, priority system is the same thing as being designated a serious violation, which means its ETT score is 11 points or higher. So we ran the numbers and saw that 109 systems that would have been priority systems if we had not made the change stopped being priority systems because of the change. And I'm sure you're also saying, so, but why do what is the exact difference for you, for your primacy agency? So we did tabulate the results for each region and for each primacy agency. We did identify the particular affected systems, or at least the ones that were affected enough that they stopped being priority systems. So we've shared these results with EPA's regional offices. If you are engaging with them in your quarterly discussion of which systems are priorities and which systems you might want to target for closer attention, you can find out which systems in your state were the ones that were affected. And I should back up one to point out that not all and all states were affected the same way. When we talk about this more, maybe we will as a result of the questions, there are various reasons why a primacy agency's reporting of PN violations may have resulted in the creation of legacy violations. And some primacy agencies and some regions had more of these challenges than others. So you can see that there were some regions where there were no affected public water systems, and some regions where there were more, and some states where there were a higher percentage of them affected, and some states where there were not. Again, this is probably part of the discussion you want to have between regions and primacy agencies as you're determining why your number of priority systems may have come down, in some cases significantly. Part of what we will also need to do before we migrate the data to the new database is clear these legacy systems from CIDWIS Fed where appropriate. And some of you might remember, if you've been around for a long time, that we did something similar back in 2011, shortly after the ETT, the Enforcement Targeting System, started to be used, because at that point, there were a number of public notification violations that people had just forgotten about for a long time, because again, once the legacy violation has been corrected, or the triggering violation has been corrected, or the triggering violation is old so that it may be difficult to collect and share the required notification, some states decided that there was no benefit to putting that administrative effort in place until the ETT scoring system came along, and suddenly a lot of these old violations were generating high scores. So back in 2011, we worked with our colleagues in the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water and created the ability to enter no further action required for some of these older violations. And we will probably need to do something very similar for the new legacy violations before we migrate the data into CIDWIS, into the modernized CIDWIS. But that is something that we're still working on, and we will let you know if and when that happens. And I will stop there and take any questions that people might have.
Thanks, Ken. I think we're going to try and do the QA at the end. So if you want to stick around, I did see one for you.
All right, I will do that.
Perfect. Thank you. If Sunny wants to pull up her presentation. Again, thanks to Ken for sharing the updates on the ETT tool. Our goal is not to de-emphasize the public notice requirements. Public notice, we think, is important for the consumers to understand the potential risk to their health, and not to minimize the importance of it. But certainly we understand that there's some legacy data cleanup that needs to happen. So that's kind of our goal with these efforts. All right, so looks like we have plenty of time. We are ahead of schedule, so we have time for a PN rule quiz. Now, Alyssa's going to put a link in the chat to the questions, to answer the questions, so we don't bombard the chat box again. So the questions, let's see if we can, I don't have control. Sunny, if you want to hit the next button. Perfect. I see the link in the chat, so if folks want to use that, we can project the results, the audience results on the screen after we're done. So the quiz today is, do these situations require public notice? We have 5 situations, and it's a yes or no if the situation requires a public notice. The first one is a system detects fluoride at 1 milligram per liter. The second one, a system failed to take the confirmation sample after exceeding the MCL for nitrate. Again, please use the link that Alyssa has posted in the chat to respond, and that way we can project the answers. It'll help keep the chat box open for questions. The third question is, a system failed to comply with variance or exemptions conditions. Fourth question, a system detected beryllium above the MCL in one sample, but not the running annual average, but the running annual average is below the MCL. And the fifth question, a system has a monitoring violation. So Alyssa is going to put some links in the chat for those results.
Yep, for all of our participants, I posted the first link to the first question, but then I thought we might be easiest to do the full questions. So please use that second link, and that should show all 5 scenarios. And we are getting responses, so this is a good sign.
Perfect. Again, if folks have questions, we've compiled some of the questions that we've received so far, but go ahead and put that in the chat. We're getting close to Q&A time, and we're happy to answer questions that folks have. Alyssa, when the first question results look good, let's take a look at those.
Okay, so we've got about 60 people who have responded. So this will refresh as we go,
Okay.
but I will go ahead and share my screen. So these are the results that we're getting. For scenario 1, it looks like the majority of folks are responding that the answer is no. The system does not have to do PN. The second scenario, the majority of folks are saying that yes, that if a system failed to take a confirmation sample after exceeding the MCL, that they do have to complete public notice. And 3 and 4 are a bit more split. Folks are saying if the system failed to comply with the variance or exemption conditions, that they do, but some folks are saying that maybe they don't, about a quarter. And then for scenario 4, when a system detects beryllium above the MCL in one sample, but the RAA is below the MCL, excuse me, most folks are saying that they do not have to do PN, but some folks are still thinking that maybe they do. Then if a system has a monitoring violation, most folks are saying that yes, they do have to complete public notice.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. Let's talk more about those answers. So the first one was this detecting fluoride at 1 milligram per liter. Folks that said no were correct. So the trigger for the public notice is above 2, and that's a special notice, and an MCL violation happens when it's over 4 milligrams per liter. And that requires the tier 2 notice. So question number 2, a system failed to take confirmation sample after exceeding the MCL for nitrate. The folks that said yes were correct. So on 141.23 for nitrate, the system is required to take a confirmation sample after they have a sample that exceeds the MCL violation. And if the system can't do public notice or if they can't do the confirmation sample within 24 hours, they need to do the public notice, the tier 1 public notice, and then they have 2 weeks to do that confirmation sample, but the idea is to get that notice out right away. The third question, a system failed to comply with the variance or exemption conditions. The folks that said yes are correct. When a system fails to or aren't meeting the conditions of the variance exemption, that's a tier 2. If the system is operating under a variance or exemption, as Senny described, it's a tier 3 notice. Question 4, a system detected beryllium above the MCL in one sample, but not the RAA, or the RAA was still below the MCL. Folks that said no were correct. So this is in the chemical contaminant rules. If the running annual average is used to determine compliance, so if the running annual average is still below the MCL, then they don't need to do PN. Although, however, remember the primacy agencies still have that flexibility to require PN if they feel it's necessary, but not required in this case. And the last question, a system has a monitoring violation. The folks that said yes were correct, so that's usually under the tier 3 requirements, unless the primacy agency requires or unless specified in the PN rule. All right, Good job, everyone. And I think we have one more poll question, more of a feedback for EPA. So the poll question is, what other PN rule topics would you like to hear more information about? It's been a while since we've done a PN webinar. This is the first time since I've joined the agency that we've done a PN webinar. So feel free, Alyssa's put another link in the chat for a link to answer this question. If you have other ideas that you might want to see more training, let us know in the chat. Again, keep those questions for the Q&A session coming. That should be coming up next. All right, I think, did you want to just report out verbally, Alyssa, on maybe what folks are saying for this one?
Sure, yeah, let me go ahead and pull this up.
I don't think we need to share the screen, maybe just report it so we don't have to keep switching back and forth.
Sure. Lots of folks are saying CIDRIS reporting.
I see that.
Which is great. Sorry, I'm just having a little bit of, let me go ahead and share the link. It looks like I might have shared the wrong one. One quick second, I apologize for the delay.
All right,
Yeah,
I see a bunch of feedback coming in the chat, so we appreciate that. And yeah, Alyssa put another link if you want to respond to that as well. But this is all good information. A lot of CIDWIS reporting. This is good to know. All right, Steny, you want to move along? Great.
Yes, let's start with the questions that we've received, and Sarah will be reading them aloud so you can answer them. The first question that we received is, do line breaks require a public notification when there is a precautionary boil water advisory?
Yeah, thanks, Steny. That's a good question. So line breaks by themselves aren't a PN trigger. However, systems may want to do a public notice. The state could require a public notice if they need to. Public notice is required if there is, let's say, a bacteria MCL or there's another violation that's happening that would trigger a PN. So it is required if the state requires it or the privacy agency. But by itself, a line break isn't necessarily a trigger for a PN. And sometimes we hear the boil water advisory referred to, and that's, I mean, I take that as a bacteria infiltration concern. So sometimes there's confusion related around that.
Thank you, Sarah. The second question is, does the rule specifically require Tier 1 public notification if a chemical sample result exceeds the 1-day and 10-day health advisories for children, or is this captured by the agency's discretion under the rule?
Thanks, Steny. That's a great question. This, in short, yes, it falls under the discretion. The health advisory levels are not regulatory. So those are, so if a state or primacy agency feels that a chemical, an unregulated contaminant exceeds those levels and they're concerned, then they could require a PN. But a health advisory is not in the regulations. it's the MCLs and the MRDLs that we focus on.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question is alternate delivery. Can the privacy agency say that the email is okay for delivery?
Yes, that's allowed in your flexibility, and that to allow alternate deliveries is required in writing, or if a state wants to adopt that in their regulations. I just would mention that it's important to work with the system and make sure that they understand make sure that's the best way to reach their constituents. For example, if a system has a really good database and has a lot of the emails for their consumers, then email may be a good way to go. However, if the system doesn't have all of the email addresses, then they may want to consider alternate deliveries. Certainly, they could use the email as a supplemental delivery as well.
Thanks. And one of the participants is asking, what about pass-through public notifications?
The pass-through public notifications. I've never heard it referred to as pass-through, so I'm glad that, Joseph, you clarified that. So pass-through, maybe we didn't cover this well enough, but when a system, if it's a system that's a wholesaler or providing water to another system, and they experience a violation and that needs a public notice, they need to notify their consecutive systems or systems, provide that information to them, and then it's the consecutive system's responsibility to then notify their consumers. So I hope that clarifies that.
Thanks. Another question that we received is, do significant deficiencies identified under the LT2 AWTR at surface water system requires public notification?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question again?
Yes. Do significant deficiencies identified under the LT2 ESWTR at surface water system require public notification?
So if I'm understanding correctly, and my trick is I usually use the Appendix A to make sure that I'm cross-referencing the CFR sections to make sure that the PN is required. But I think it's under 141.404, the treatment techniques for groundwater systems. And if that's the case, then it's a Tier 2 public notice.
Thanks, Anna. One of the participants asked, did I hear you right? That if a treatment technique violation hasn't been corrected in 5 years, and I think that this question is for Ken.
Yep.
Ken, if a treatment technique violation hasn't been corrected in 5 years, it will go off the ETT?
I'm sorry if I created that impression, because the distinction I was trying to make is that the ETT prior to this change would sunset a violation 5 years after the compliance period end date. And there are a class of violations known as open-ended violations that have no compliance period end date. The PN violations are open-ended, so for them we made an exception and are sunsetting them 5 years after the compliance period begin date. Now, if you look at treatment technique violations, probably one that a lot of you care about would be a type 45 failure to correct a significant deficiency treatment technique violation. That has no compliance period end date either. So that would not sunset from the ETT.
Thank you, Ken. We have the following question. Where can the regions find the pre and post ETT reconciliation that took place within the ECAD? Ken, I think that this question is also for you. Where can the regions find the pre and post ETT reconciliation that took place within the ECAD?
I'm sorry, I was trying to read that and I had a block over it. So this information was distributed to the enforcement branch chiefs on Carole King's monthly call. But certainly if you do need your own copy, please email me and I'll send it to you. think I am going to send this just to the EPA people because, of course, it has information for the entire nation, and the regional folks can filter it down to just what they need for their own states.
Thank you, Ken. And this question is for Sarah. Sarah, can email or social media be used as the only form of public notification distribution?
Thanks, Sunny. I think I know who this question came from. So we don't have any guidance or regulations that specifically indicate social media, using social media. If it's a supplemental delivery method, we encourage supplemental delivery methods. If a system is active on their social media, I think that's a great way to help spread the word. But as a sole method for public notice delivery, I don't know that would meet the direct delivery intent that the rule has, but that's something that we would need to explore further.
Thank you. The other question is a public notification schedule automatically generated in CIDWIS when a monitoring violation is accepted?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't know CIDWIS well enough to answer that question. I saw all the mentions of CIDWIS reporting, so I think that's a great idea for a follow-on training. So I don't have the answer to that question specifically, but hopefully we can put together a CIDWIS training that might be helpful.
Okay. Sarah, can you provide some examples of a Tier 3 public notification in a CCR that meets the content requirements? What exactly does this look like, assuming this may be more than the listing of violations that's come from Drinking Water Watch?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way that I'm imagining it is a system could include, perhaps as an appendix or at the end, the Tier 3 notices that they need to include, and they could somehow compile them and word them in a way so that it's not just, if the system has 3 or 4 violations, it's not just 3 or 4 stacked, but still has to meet the 10 content requirements, except for those special notices, some of those special notices that I mentioned, when they're including their PN and the CCRs.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question that we received is, please clarify if the 12th violation is a treatment technique violation for purpose of a PN.
That's a good question. I'm not sure I understand what the question is asking. The 12 VIO, I'm not sure if you're referring to a specific number of violation. So maybe the person could clarify that in the chat, and we can come back to it.
Okay. We have one more question, and it is, any reason other types of open-ended violation type 334 that are 5 or more years old could not be handled as legacy PN type 75? Are you stated for public notification bias? This type of violations do not adequately represent a system current violation point status, and there is no health-based concern for a missourced sample from 5 or more years ago. And this is from, maybe this is a question for Ken. And Ken, do you want me to repeat it? Because it was like a statement and a question. And let me repeat it.
Well, and I have to admit that I don't know if it's my connection or yours, but I didn't catch a lot of that.
So the statement and the question that was posted is, any reason other types of open-ended violations, type 34, that are 5 or more years old could not be handled as legacy public notifications type 75? So are there any reasons other types of open-ended violations and in parentheses, it says type 34, that are 5 or more years old could not be handled as legacy public notifications. And then the participant
I think I got enough of that.
Okay.
I think I got enough of that I can at least start the response, and maybe we would need some follow-up. But as I said just a few minutes ago, public notification violations, I believe that is both type 75 and type 76, are the exception to the open-ended violations that will sunset from the ETT. And we want to be very careful when we sunset violations from the scoring of the ETT that we do it appropriately. The example I gave earlier of the type 45 violation, which is a treatment technique which is open-ended, if the violation remains uncorrected, that does still present a current risk to the people who drink that water. So that's a reason why that violation does not sunset. I didn't hear what specific question or what specific rule the questioner was asking about, but that same calculation would apply. We would look at the specific violation, determine if the ongoing violation presents a current and present risk to the users before we would potentially decide that we would allow it to sunset.
Thank you, Ken. The next question is, will it be appropriate for a public notification violation to sunset 5 years after the compliance period began, date particularly in cases that involve long-term solutions for contaminant such as arsenic or nitrate?
Well, I think I kind of answered that question, but another factor to consider is when you are looking at long-term repeating violations, you have new violations all the time. So while you may have a 5-year-old violation, a 6-year-old violation, you probably also have a 4-year-old violation and a 3-year-old violation, a 2-year-old violation, which would be contributing to the score. So a system would still have may still have enough violations that its score is 11 points or higher, and that would reflect the true potential risk to the people who use that water.
Thanks, Ken. I think that I have asked all the questions received at this moment. If there are additional questions that need to be addressed, please let us know.
It looks like, Sarah, there's some discussion going back and forth in the chat about what Emily meant by her question. If you wanted to go back to those, Jamie is saying that the state or CIDWA state violation code 12 is a stage 1 violation, a system that is not operated by a state approved qualified operator, and Emily confirmed that that is what she was asking about.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm going to see if I can unmute Jamie Harris, who might be able to help kind of explain this. All right, Jamie, I promoted you to presenter. Do you want to help explain this for me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I don't actually know the answer. I was just trying to figure out if it was if that was the violation that Emily was talking about, and what the initial question was for is that violation a treatment technique violation for the purposes of PN? And I don't know the answer to it. I was just trying to figure out what violation that was.
Sure. The not operated by an approved operator, is that the violation we're talking about?
Yeah.
If it helps, for the ETT, we consider that to be a treatment technique violation.
Thank you, Ken. I'm trying to do a quick search in the PN role. Like I said, the way that I usually operate is I try and find the citation in the CFR in the Appendix A. I have too many windows open. That's really my problem. I may have to come back to you, Emily. I apologize. I'm not familiar with the with that. Is there another question that we need to answer? I think I saw another one about the pass-through violations. What violations require a pass-through? And the idea is that if the violation applies to the consecutive system. So for example, if the wholesaler gets a violation for nitrate, for example, they would send along that violation information to their consecutive systems. And how can you track that? I'm not sure what you might mean. Joseph, why don't, if you shoot me an email, maybe I can help figure that out. Sounds good. Okay. If the consecutive system doesn't distribute the PN, do they get a violation? Yes. Great question, Jamie. All right, more things to note. We have some important links in the handouts. I also want to point out the drinking water training link at the bottom. We continually update our training website with more training opportunities. I also want to note that we're recording this presentation and we'll have the slides and the recording available on the website. It may take us a little while, maybe a week or so please be patient with us as we do that, and that will be available for anyone that may have missed the presentation. And then I included a link to a memo that we released in September that was a reminder for states and primacy agencies to the responsibilities or the importance of the public notification. Ken talked about the memo that OECA produced in December in coordination with our office. I believe I included that memo in the handouts and in the chat box at the very beginning of the meeting. And here is our contact information. If you have additional questions or thoughts, maybe after the presentation, looks like we may still have a few questions coming in